Oh look what the green screen's doing to... Ooh. So anyway, this is the 8th game in the ongoing Resident Evil saga, and this actually marks the 25th anniversary of the series. How did it grow up so fast? But anyway, just over 2 years ago we got the Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 remakes, which were not only a throwback to the older games in the series, but also a throwback to the older, over-the-shoulder style of Resident Evil 4. Now, this game, much like Resident Evil 7, abandons seeing your character entirely and is a first-person adventure. Now, once again in this game you play as Ethan Winters, who was the protagonist of Resident Evil 7, and this marks one of the very few times in the series where you have the same main playable character 2 entries in a row. I think off the top of my head the only other time this would have happened is that you played as Chris Redfield in both Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6. Every other time in the series it's been that you play as Chris and Jill, then Leon and Claire, then Jill, then Claire and Chris, then Leon, then Chris and Sheva, then Chris and Leon and Ada and whoever else was in number 6. There was a lot of characters in number 6. Now, as a very quick heads up, I must warn you that there are some very light story spoilers within this review, but don't worry, we're not going to go into any major spoilers. Ethan starts the game with his wife Mia and their baby Rose. And very unusually for a Resident Evil game, the game has a few minutes that take place in what could be considered normal life. Last year's Resident Evil 3 remake had a very short period of normalcy before the outbreak started, and it's an interesting thing to include in the series, and one day it would be interesting just to see a game where Chris Redfield or Ada just investigating things, and perhaps it's a bit more of like a spy adventure without all of the zombies and monsters at the beginning of the game. Might be an interesting thing to see some point in the future. After a few minutes of domestic bliss where Mia is cooking a lovely meal for you and you go and put the baby to bed, suddenly Mia is shot and killed, and it turns out that it's Chris Redfield that did this. So Shock Horror, the main hero of the series, seemingly has gone bad. Ethan and Rose are quickly whipped away into a special forces vehicle, and after a short van crash later, Ethan finds himself alone in the dark. Not to be confused with the game Alone in the Dark, because that's something else. It would seem Ethan and Mia were in some kind of witness protection program after the events of Resident Evil 7, and they're in some unspecified European country. Ethan makes it through to a village, and it doesn't take long before he discovers that the shit is hitting the fan. Otherwise known as werewolves are running amok. In terms of the series, it feels a bit odd for there to be straight up werewolves and witches in this game, which the game heavily focuses on. But with all the mutations throughout the years, there are usually explanations, and you can probably expect that there will be some reason why humans may be transforming into wolf-like beings instead of the standard zombies. As an enemy, the werewolves are very much like the villagers and other similar enemies from Resident Evils 4 and 5, in that they can run, are intelligent, and can wield weapons. I did feel that they often just crept around in front of you and are a bit too easy to line up and shoot in the face. And I do feel that the werewolves being the equivalent of this game's zombies does kind of downplay that a werewolf should be something very scary. I feel that in the context of the overall series, a werewolf should be at least as much of a threat as a hunter or a licker, and after mowing down 10 or 20 werewolves, their menace just lessened a bit for me. Also on the werewolf front, I feel that there was a little bit of a missed opportunity in that the game didn't include any Resident Evil style dog enemies, and if there had been like villagers, wolves, like dog monsters, and then the werewolves, there could have been 3 different levels of, oh, here's a possessed villager, here's a wolf, it's bitten the villager, it now becomes a werewolf. So yeah, just having a one-size-fits-all Lycan didn't quite do as much for me as I think it would have been if they'd been used more sparingly. As mentioned earlier, the game has a greater focus on action, and it's clear that Resident Evil 4 is the biggest influence on this entry. We do lose the item box of the early games, which returned in Resident Evil 7, and instead have a Resident Evil 4 style inventory screen, which means you have to move items about like Tetris and fit them into your bag, and that also key items are held separately. In addition to this, there is a new merchant character, which is introduced and fulfills much of the same function as the merchant in Resident Evil 4 did. That's in that you can buy and sell items and also upgrade your weapons. A new feature here is that you can kill non-monster animals and collect their meat, which the merchant, whose name is Duke Nukem, I don't know.
Duke, I need a favor.
Anyway, he will cook up these ingredients and that will allow you to upgrade certain abilities, such as your overall health or your speed. Duke also plays a part in the story of the game, unlike the merchant in Resident Evil 4, and to be honest, this is to mixed results. Whereas in Resident Evil 4 the merchant fulfilled the purpose of letting you buy and sell weapons, his presence could be questioned but is quickly ignored. For logic of the story, it makes no sense that someone could be running around with all of these weapons selling them to you, rather than them trying to just get away and save their own skin. The Resident Evil 4 merchant was mysterious, and once you understood he was only there as a gameplay mechanic, you could just ignore him.
What are you buying? Just something an old friend of mine used to say.
With Duke this isn't the case. He is much more involved in the plot and seems to know a lot of what's going on, who has taken Rose, who the villains are, and it's never really explained how he factors into all of this. The game's preview and demo made a big deal of the castle that you will visit in the game and the very tall woman and her daughters, who are all very witchy. But as you play the game you find that these characters perhaps don't play as big a role as you may have expected they do. Instead, the game features several enemies and locations that connect to the village, and in this sense it makes the village have a similar feel to the mansion from Resident Evil 1 or the police station from Resident Evil 2. Bit by bit you will open up and unlock more areas to visit, and as the map gets fleshed out you will continually head back to the central areas, which you will learn like the back of your hand, just as you did with the Resident Evil Raccoon City police station. The game really does retain the feeling of past Resident Evil games, and is a good blend of the exploration and puzzles of early games with the action of 4 and 5. This does have some more elaborate and wild sequences as the later games in the series became known for, and whilst it is more action based than 7, it isn't all out action as like 6 for example, has sometimes been criticised for being too actiony based. One pro tip I can give any first time players of this game is that as soon as I realised the game had taken the inventory and weapon upgrades from Resident Evil 4, I felt I knew exactly how to play for an easy time through the game. Simply put, kill everything. Whenever you kill a werewolf or monster, the game will give you either ammo or cash, which the monster will drop. You can then pick these up and use them to further upgrade your weapons. Realising this, I made a point of killing everything, and I found that I almost was never at risk of running out of ammo, and by the halfway point of the game I had upgraded my weapons so much I was comfortably overpowered so that I was almost never killed. Much like Resident Evil 4, the game gives you the ability to start a new playthrough after you have completed the game, and you retain all of the weapons and upgrades you had from the end of the previous run. This means in subsequent playthroughs you feel super powered, and this is great for speedruns. Other games sometimes allow you to earn or unlock bonus weapons, but it's not the same as when you get to have your own back catalogue of weapons and upgrades which you have cultivated and nurtured yourself. The in-game tasks that you need to complete to unlock new weapons and skills from Resident Evil 3 Remake is back, and this adds a huge amount of replay value to the game, as it will take most players at least a few playthroughs to unlock everything. For the most part I've really enjoyed this game, but there are a few areas which I wasn't such a fan of. Enemies wise, I've already mentioned that the werewolves could have been used better in my opinion, and although this game has more variety of monster than Resident Evil 7 for example, there perhaps aren't as many iconic feeling enemies as in other games in the series. There are a couple of variations to the werewolf theme, and some creepy dudes like Igor from Young Frankenstein who wield swords. Again, I didn't quite feel that I got the sense of who these were or how they factored in story-wise, but they actually felt like they should have been the first enemy, like the villagers, as if they'd been turned like in Resident Evil 4 and now they're just possessed and have swords for some reason. Then later on you could go against werewolves and they would feel like a bigger threat. Beyond this, there are flying demon-like monsters, which when they first come at you and you realise that they're giant, man-sized bat monsters with a weird thing coming out of their face, are truly terrifying. Later in the game there are some monsters that have clearly got lots of upgrades to them, and these are some of the scariest monsters in the series. Never mind Pyramid Head from Silent Hill, Propeller Head in Resident Evil 8 is a force to be reckoned with. Another thing I wasn't such a fan of with this game is that after the initial setup to the story, it felt like there was quite a long stretch where you were just doing a fetch quest before the story really kicks back in. Of course, other games in the series are just about escaping monsters or maybe rescuing someone, and this is no different. But again, with the heavy teases of Chris being a bad guy and there being werewolves and the tall lady, it just felt that very quickly it was on a repetitive, now you need to get this item, now you need to get this item, run from this place, kill this bad guy. I would have liked there to have been a few more villagers who needed rescuing or something to uncover, like a deep dark secret within the village itself that builds up as you go along. Like that there were still villagers alive and you were just piecing together that they all knew this same secret about what was going on there. Missed opportunity perhaps. Of course these are all just minor nitpicks compared to what my biggest gripe with this game is, and that is just too dark. Like, playing through the game I often found that I was inside houses in the village or in the caves, and it just was super dark. I was down in the mine and I just couldn't see where I was meant to be going. I was trying to adjust the brightness, I was wondering if I was coming down with a migraine, because it was literally making my head hurt in the end, just by the fact that the game was too dark. In some Resident Evil games you will have a torch, and like in Resident Evil 2 Remake, that is quite a dark game, but you have a torch and can see where you're looking at. In certain parts of this game you have a torch, and I was just desperate to be able to switch it on at times, because it was just so visually dark that I would often just resort to loading up the map screen just to see if there are areas that still needed to be explored, and if there wasn't I would just run through them and just bring up the map and think, right, what direction do I need to face just to get out of that. All this said, and the game is still a mainline Resident Evil game which is 100% worth your time, especially if you're a fan of the Resident Evil or survival horror genre. The Resident Evil series is in an interesting phase as we reach its 25th anniversary, and it's clear that with both the Resident Evil 7 and 8 first-person games and the over-the-shoulder remakes, the series is still continually finding ways to evolve. Whereas the remakes play on nostalgia whilst remixing the story enough that will both either excite or enrage long-time fans of the series in equal measure, 7 and 8 are taking the series forward, and it will be very interesting to see what comes next. The series has always been at risk of just repeating the formula of new location, new zombies, new virus, new zombie outbreak, but it's clear that Capcom had got a plan that refreshed the story and gameplay with Resident Evil 7, and that has very much continued with Resident Evil 8. The game also gives an indication of what the future may bring for the series, and as you'll see when you play it, it may not just be more of the same. And so there you have Village Resident Evil 8. It's a really fun game to play with a good story which admittedly I felt could have been fleshed out a little bit more. I don't think it's as much of an instant classic as perhaps the Resident Evil 2 remake or that Resident Evil 7 was. And if I'm completely honest, I actually think I enjoyed Resident Evil 3's remake last year slightly more than I did this one. That may be that I was expecting slightly more from the story with this one, or it might be that I just found the sections that were a little bit too dark, too distracting, and it pulled me out of the game at times. That, and also that I am not as much a fan as the first-person Resident Evil games as I am the over-the-shoulder or classic ones. Still, this is an excellent Resident Evil game, and it's probably my favourite game that I've played this year thus far. This is a very good first-person survival horror experience, and it will definitely please fans who liked Resident Evil 7, and it will also please fans of the series overall, and especially those who liked Resident Evil 4. Now, perhaps my expectations were a little bit high with the story, with the teases about what's going on with Chris, and how things are going to progress with the story with Ethan. And whilst it was a very good story in the end, I felt there was a bit of a gap in the middle where it wasn't quite meeting my expectations. And for this, I could probably blame my own expectations, but also what Capcom put out on the teasers. Now, once I've got used to all of this within time, I'm sure that this game will grow on me a lot more. And that's me saying it with me already thinking it's a very, very good game. So I would definitely recommend anyone who is a fan of the survival horror genre to check out Village Resident Evil 8. So from me, until next time, do make sure you smash that subscribe button over on youtube.com/Extreme Improv. Do give it a thumbs up and tell your friends all about the video. And if you want to see the written version of this review, plus so much more Resident Evil content that we already have and have coming up in the weeks and months to follow, do head over to the website extremed.tv. So from me, until next time, stay safe, always stay extreme, and watch out for werewolves.